The Run Crew, naturally, has a popular Instagram account, just as it has a catchy slogan, branded merchandise, weekly gatherings after dusk. Its runners are young and diverse. Some sport tattoos and have creative jobs. And there's even an Olympic hopeful, marathon runner Rob Watson, who counts himself among the group's community-minded regulars. And it has a quietly charismatic leader in 36-year-old Ryan Chilibeck, a traditionally trained pizzaiolo who operates Famoso Neapolitan Pizzeria on Commercial Drive, and has since turned the crew into one of Canada's most buzzed-about road running contingents. East Vancouver Run Crew, EVRC in short, possesses all of the signifiers that have become modern-day emblems of the world's oldest sport, part of a worldwide movement that makes running more social, less scary, and in the eyes of some, perhaps even cool. And with its newfound emphasis on community, diversity, and quality of life, the once solitary pastime seems to have found a kindred spirit in modern culinary culture, forming an unlikely relationship between the grueling, calorie-burning sport and the hedonistic, calorie-rich pleasures of good food and ice-cold beer. What the group didn't have, at least not until recently, was a designated meeting place. Instead, Ryan and his steadily growing cohort of pavement pounders had gathered at one of several local breweries. First at Parallel 49, and then at others like Red Truck and Postmark Brewing, and on occasion at Ryan's own restaurant, Famoso Neapolitan Pizzeria, until each venue was unable to accommodate the crew's quickly escalating numbers. It's for this reason that EVRC recently made its home at the Wise Lounge on the corner of Adenac Street and Victoria Drive, just below a historic performing arts venue that's run by a non-profit, community-minded organization in East Vancouver. This February evening, my first with the crew, it rained hard, making the pavement outside Wise Hall perilously slick, matting our hair and soaking our clothes and shoes. So it came as something of a surprise when, from the shadows, several runners emerged, clad in caps and reflective gear and branded crew merch, and a handful of others followed suit through the wet. By the start of the night's run, I had counted 23 individuals, each of them surprisingly chipper under the downpour, and when it came to running in Raincouver, obviously vastly more experienced and committed than I. Earlier that day, I had dropped by Famoso Neapolitan Pizzeria to meet Ryan Chilibeck, whose life often appears to be a confluence of beer and pizza consumption, running, and community building. As I approached the restaurant, I was stunned with a sudden recollection. According to an article I'd read years earlier in the National Post, Famoso was once the victim of anti-gentrification anarchists, part of an escalating class war that had erupted in the city and had previously targeted downtown Eastside eateries, Pigeon, and Save on Meats. But on this morning, it was quiet, with little sign of any disturbance, save for the loud banter and occasional peals of laughter from a gathering of homeless men across the street. Upon my arrival, Ryan greeted me warmly in a knit cap, teal t-shirt, gray jeans, and black Vans, slip-ons, which I noticed as we shook hands were covered in a layer of flour. His hair was buzzed short, with his self-described husky Ukrainian jeans and a surfer's laid-back demeanor. He noticeably lacked both the lithe, bony frame that characterizes many long-distance runners and the severe countenance of the culinary world's sharp-tongued and often militaristic personalities. Past its entrance, the room at Famoso had exposed brick walls and industrial lighting in places, but the leather boots were more family restaurant than hipster hangout, and replays of the previous night's NBA All-Star Game flickered on two wall-mounted television screens. To my right was a small fireplace, and above it, a painting of what appeared to be Mount Vesuvius, menacing-looking and ready to erupt over Naples. We have an open concept kitchen here, and it's really important to the success of this place. You don't really have that segregation between front and back of house, Ryan said, pointing me to a space dominated by a large, bell-shaped forno imported from Italy and separated from the dining room only by a wooden counter. You have to say things openly here and have those conversations that are normally reserved for the back kitchen. So it really takes hospitable people who have a respect for each other and for the restaurant. The desire to be hospitable, I would discover, fuels Ryan's life as much as pizza, running, or any of the countless cups of coffee he consumes during a night shift. Naturally, this meant he was obliged to feed me, and it wasn't long before fresh dough was being tossed through the air in a spirited demonstration of traditional Neapolitan pie making. The margarita that emerged from the forno moments later had a crust that was chewy but still crispy, and was topped with ingredients dictated by the stringent laws of the Associazione Verace Pizza Napoletana. Robust Campagna tomatoes, creamy fior di latte, hand-torn aromatic basil, and extra virgin olive oil. The second oven-fired pie, the cavoletti, was absolutely addictive, albeit less conventional. A honey-glazed, savory sweet concoction of oven-roasted Brussels sprouts, prosciutto crisps, gorgonzola, dates, and walnuts. By the time I'd finished inhaling half of the cavoletti, several customers had filtered quietly into the restaurant. A small group of silver-haired retirees, a young couple with their daughter, and a quiet 30-something bearded man in a baseball cap who sat alone in a booth. Ryan circled around to each table, pausing to chit-chat with the early birds. The variety in the crowd, I noticed, spoke to the cultural mosaic that is Commercial Drive, but it also mirrored the remarkable diversity of his employees. A mix of students, actors, dancers, musicians, and artists, many of whom also call the neighborhood home. They're the kind of people that you want to hang out with, Ryan added. We know the food is good, but you can't always teach people how to be nice all the time. So I hire people that can bring the hospitality side too, because it's not about us. You have to leave your ego at the door if you want to get the best product on the table for the guest. And if we work together, it gets done. Over here, we try to create an atmosphere that feels like a second home to our staff. We've had staff at work here since the day we opened the restaurant, and I think that goes to show what kind of environment we're fostering. After lunch, I asked Ryan how he had come to navigate the once uncharted waters of Vancouver's running scene. But more than that, I wanted to know how he'd built thriving communities in two vastly different fields, the kind of intimate and hospitable environments he had known growing up. In 2014, Ryan began training alone for the Scotiabank Half Marathon, a 13.1-mile-long course that begins at the University of British Columbia's Thunderbird Arena, winds around Jericho Beach, and ends at Vancouver's historic Stanley Park. Like many, he quickly tired of the long, solitary runs required to build up to the distance, and in need of a training partner to keep him motivated, he put the word out, first at the restaurant, and later on Craigslist and social media. It was a way to have someone to be accountable to with running because you're always accountable to someone at work, and you're accountable to your wife, or if you have a kid. In running, there's usually no one to be accountable to except yourself. It did not go well. Despite some verbal interest, he was left alone, day after day, outside Famoso until frustration and doubt began to cloud his initial enthusiasm. Vancouver, a city highly praised for its postcard-perfect vistas, but notorious for the icy dispositions of its residents, had given him the cold shoulder. He began to wonder what it would be like to bring them, even just a small few of them, together. The solution, as it often does, involved beer, and more specifically, switching the run's rendezvous to the nearby breweries, where some of Vancouver's best pints were being served. I think the moment it started to get real was when we changed our starting point from a corner of a street to a place where people felt more comfortable meeting in. And that was at Parallel 49 Brewery, Ryan said of the spot where East Vancouver Run Crew was unofficially born. People had heard of it, and people knew there was a little tasting room there, so we had a place to hang out afterward. And from there, 4 people showed up, then 8, and it just kept growing. It became a mutually beneficial relationship. The breweries provided highly visible, safe havens for congregating before and after runs. And Ryan's skyrocketing numbers meant Monday nights were now among the busiest of the week for local watering holes. By the summer of 2015, just a year after the Scotiabank race, Ryan was struggling to find a tasting room large enough to accommodate the crowd, which on some nights was approaching 100 runners. "We really found a connection from the beverage side of things right off the bat," he said. "It's a point of conversation for a lot of people. People love beer and they love running. And if you put them together, it's kind of like the carrot at the end of the horse's nose. You run, you put in a bit of work, and you get a reward at the end of it." Many people in Vancouver talk about how hard it is to meet others in the city, he added. Everyone tends to stick to his or her own personal group, and that's one of the main things we provide. It's a chance for people who are like-minded on the running side of things, but who wouldn't otherwise cross paths in their normal lives to come together and have a beer. It's amazing what you can do by having a meal or a pint together. We simply put them together in one room and make sure they talk. While pints provided the main pull, Ryan's efforts on social media made sure that the news of the brewery-centric gatherings went public, and in a positive way. It's not very inviting when you see a group picture of 3 people running in the dark, he explained. But if you see 50 people running at night and they're having fun, that starts to break down the barriers. Besides advertising the time and locations of the runs, the crew's online presence served another important purpose. It connected them to the larger, worldwide running community, and in particular, to a burgeoning culture that had come to prize camaraderie over competition and social media over stopwatches. In Canada, these socially driven contingents have spread from coast to coast. Toronto's Parkdale Roadrunners, the Night Terrors, and Junction Running Club, Halifax's North End Bridge Runners, East Laurier Running Club in Montreal, Vancouver's multifaceted Tight Club, and Ryan's own East Vancouver Run Crew. In each instance, maintaining a culture of inclusivity has been the key to growth. We have someone who sweeps at the back and makes sure no one feels like they're slowing anyone else down, Ryan said. The crew, he added, emphasizes only the setting of goals, no matter how lofty or meager they may be. Its yardstick for success, therefore, is simply the ability of its members to reach them. Just as Famoso has come into its own in the pizzeria scene, EVRC has found its niche as Vancouver's most social gathering of runners, a culture embodied by the popular #NoJerksAllowed mantra. It gets brought up a lot, Ryan laughed when I prodded him about the hashtag. No one wants to be the jerk. It's really about how you conduct yourself in public. Smile, try to be a part of it, bring something to the run, don't just be a sponge and take something away. I didn't mean for it to be directed at anyone in particular, it's just how I live my life. I try not to surround myself with jerks. When you run a restaurant, you don't want them working for you, so why would I want to hang out with someone during my social time who isn't bringing positive vibes? In Toronto, during a recent meeting of international running crews, Ryan attended a captain's dinner with a handful of the other leaders. The conversation never breached the subject of individual efforts, and centered instead on the more pressing issue of community. Everyone has the same vision, he recalled. It was just community, community, community. It wasn't about us at all, the people who started it. It was an exchange of ideas on, for example, having a runner join a group who can only run 2 kilometers and figuring out a way to get that person to a half marathon. The implications of that conversation extended far beyond running. I had someone who was involved in a certain fundraiser recently, and it was about what we could do to support that person in the fundraising effort, he said. We're really trying to build ourselves into a staple of this community, and not just as a running crew, but as a community-based running crew. If you look at Parkdale Roadrunners in Toronto or Brooklyn Runners, they're just massive and they're winning community awards, non-running related community awards. It just shows that everything they are doing is real. They're developing a family, which is so hard to do in Vancouver, and probably equally tough to do in places like Toronto and New York. People stick to themselves. The most recent manifestation of the crew's communal approach took place in October of last year, when EVRC teamed up with the Breakfast Club of Canada to host a 24-hour treadmill relay at Kitsilano's Vancouver Running Co. The initiative, which raised over $5,000 towards nutritious breakfast for nearby schools, involved runners taking turns on the store's treadmill and logging as many miles as they possibly could. Ryan had hoped for 24 participants willing to run an hour each. Instead, nearly 45 showed up, turning a potentially tedious event into a raucous all-night party, and then later the next day into a massive neighborhood run. Back at the clubhouse, runners had come in from the wet and were now shedding their rain-sodden clothes, sauntering about in shoes that, with every step, squeaked and squished water like sponges. A long line had already formed at the bar counter, where a single server was filling glasses with any of the 5 local beers on the rotating menu. Earlier in the evening, Ryan's route had taken us from the Wise Lounge and towards Commercial Drive to a quick pit stop at Grandview Park. A lap of a waterlogged school track past a labyrinth of graffitied art studios on the west side of 1000 Parker Street, and then back up to the Hastings Street, where we had looped back at a surprising incline towards the clubhouse. Each of these landmarks, I realized, were places I'd passed countless times, but never explored on foot and never in the dark, or with strangers. And though I had finished the run somewhere near the back of the pack, swept up by an endlessly energetic Lululemon employee who made sure we avoided getting lost or, worse yet, flattened by a vehicle en route to our destination, no one seemed to notice or care. When I looked around, the volume and the energy in the clubhouse was rising. Conversations getting louder, fueled by frothy pints from the tap, simultaneous games of darts, a heated foosball match in a dimly lit corner of the sprawling space. Ryan gathered the group for a photo that appeared minutes later on the group's Instagram feed. Between rounds of darts, when I asked him about his own goals for the crew, he reiterated a vision from earlier that afternoon. "I'd like to try and influence as many people as possible," he said. "I'm trying to learn as many of their names as possible, trying to make newcomers feel welcome and get their feedback. I want to know if they found it inviting, if they would come back, and if they had any positive experiences, just like in a restaurant. As a manager and owner, you're touching every table, just seeing how everyone's experience was and making sure that they're going to be a repeat customer." Pausing, he added, "Everyone has his or own goals, and that's the thing I love most about the sport. You're going to have your ups and downs in running, but one of the most rewarding things in life is meeting your own goals and besting yourself. But you have to have achievable goals. You can't just go from your couch to running a marathon. At the restaurant, if it's 5 o'clock and I walk in and know it's going to be a slow day, I'll set a goal for my staff to sell 2 bottles of wine instead of 20 bottles. Everybody wins, and you celebrate, and the next day you try to do better. I think it's very similar to running in that way. You're never going to hit it out of the park every day, so you just roll with it. Do the best you can, celebrate wins, and look for opportunities."